Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this podcast session.
Hello.
Today,
Hello.
today we will be talking about design and emotions. So before we start, I would like to introduce my colleagues, fantastic three designers that they are here today with me. So please.
Hi, my name is Aleksandra Czubieniak. I'm associate architect in STUDIOI in technical design section.
Hello, I'm Mariam Alhammadi. I'm a junior interior designer at STUDIOI.
Hi, I'm Rhuben. I'm a senior landscape architect at STUDIOI.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, I am Marta Blesa, a lead business development manager, and I will be your host today. Let's start with something to warm up. So I was thinking yesterday while I was preparing this podcast, if you can tell me when was the last time that you visit some building or some space that you really feel something deeply. It could be something good, like you feel surprised, or maybe you feel sad, something, some emotions.
So I think the most recognized emotion that I would think of when, I try to think about the buildings is the emotion of getting like overwhelmed and surprised by the size. And I'm thinking, about the monumental buildings like, architecture, religious architecture, like churches and mosques, or like monumental governmental buildings, this sort of thing. So like you enter and you're just suddenly overwhelmed by, how huge it is. And, all of the setting of the interior is also, sort of making you feel small. I'm thinking, stuff like St. Peter's Cathedral in Rome. So you just like enter in your wow because of the size. So this sort of thing tends to repeat a lot in governmental buildings. But the one that I actually comes to my mind, which was very surprising, and I'm sure you're going to be super surprised by this example, is Dubai Civil Defense Office, which is, a governmental
I was
building.
not expecting that.
Right, exactly. I know this example is really weird, but why it comes to mind is because this building, okay, from the outside, it actually looks like the typical government building. So it is a little bit, serious and like big, and you can expect, okay, this is serious stuff. This is civil defense. But then when I entered, I was very, very surprised because the space was more like a hotel, like a luxury hotel lobby, and it was actually very pleasant and very warm, and it had very nice lighting. The lighting was soft, and it was subdivided in very nice cozy spaces to sit, and it just the furniture, everything was pleasant, so more like a lobby than a civil defense offices. So I guess that element of surprise and it, because it was actually not what I expected, that made me really remember that space.
That's nice. Interesting. For sure.
Weird, I know.
What about you, Mariam?
Now, thinking of it, like when you mentioned the scale of buildings and when you mentioned how you're affected by the scale, I just recall visiting my old home and visiting it as a child, or remembering it as a child. I remember it felt really huge. And now revisiting those spaces where you had certain, I would say, observation of as a kid changed. Now seeing it as an old grown woman with, interior design perspective. So this is the space that made me think about how we change our perspectives of places. And the most feeling I recall while I visited this space is being, I would say, intimidated by how you can change perspectives of spaces. That's it for me.
Yeah, I like that. I think, building on what both of you are saying, it's like that moment of surprise, moment of, this unexpected moment, discovering something. For me, like walking down a street that you've always walked down, you could have, lived there for years, and then suddenly you encounter, like, you're with a friend or a stranger who hasn't been there before, and those people normally see things through a different lens, and you end up being taken down a route that you generally don't take because it's not efficient, or it's just not, the route that you take. And I just keep thinking of this space that I discovered the last time I was back in South Africa. It's just a small little courtyard off the side of one of these very busy main roads that I've always walked down, and just being like pleasantly surprised. And I think it's just that moment of joy that's like, it's quite shocking to the system. It's like, this has always been here. This doesn't make any sense. And just like being able to enjoy this moment of discovery. I just really love that feeling. And often these spaces are just, you know, the leftover space between buildings. And I think that's often where the most beauty and the most excitement takes place.
I'm sure that's part of the reason why we remember it, because, you know, there's so many beautiful spaces. And obviously, let's say Dubai Civil Defense Office is not the most beautiful space I've seen, but for some reason I remembered it, right? Because I remembered it, I think, because of the surprise and because I was not exactly expecting it. Yeah. So like, this is the same thing that happens to you, right? That it's okay, you enjoy many things, but the one thing that makes you, you know, that this memory stuck with you is maybe the right thing.
Same thing with going back to your childhood home. I drove past my childhood home recently and I was like, this place is tiny. Like, I remember it being so much bigger.
Maybe because you were smaller. I guess
it's just an interesting
but
observation.
I'm happy that all the spaces that you mentioned with the emotions, it's like happy emotions. So I'm glad that at least we are positive.
Yeah, I mean, that's also probably a psychological thing, right? So like we don't
be.
want to remember the other, probably, or maybe it's not the first thing that comes to mind, right? Because we sort of bury it, hopefully.
And I think it sticks to your mind because it's kind of shocking, even if it is in a positive way. It shocked you when you entered, and it shocked me to see how the scale is different. And same to you. So maybe that's why it sticks. It shocks, and that's why you have this, you know, it's always there. It's permanent in your head.
Okay, good. So let's dive in a little bit more into the emotions. So the big question could be, do you think design can be emotional? When you design, do you design with your emotions and later the functionality comes? Or you are looking for the functionality and the emotions are on the way?
Well, I think designing with emotion is a luxury in most cases. I think all of us as designers, we strive to carry that through as, I don't know, like the philosopher of the space that you're trying to design. It's like the weightiness of a design. I think the emotional stuff kind of gets forgotten often along the way, especially if you're working on long-term projects. I think the functionality, I think as long as you're holding on to this, like what is the feeling I'm trying to capture here, the functionality can slot into place. And the functionality could potentially become a tool to assist that emotional connection that you're trying to establish within a space. Yeah, those are my thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I agree. And I think it's just sad that I am, let's say, a more experienced designer, let's not say old.
Experience, I like that.
Experienced designer. And then I am obviously have more memories and more experiences and then more failures that we, you know, have as a baggage as designers. So I think, unfortunately, with time, as you gain these experiences, you sort of try to avoid certain errors, mistakes. So it's more like you build up on the practical side, I think. So you are more aware and you stay more focused on what is going to work, and you tend to forget or maybe tend to look less at what you want to achieve, and you try to stay focused on avoiding mistakes and, you know, like, and being more practical. And even that probably takes away a little bit of emotion, you know. Maybe the main emotion would be fear of, you know, of failing, but but I think, you know, it's more driven by that. But I'm sure Mariam will disagree.
I'm not totally disagreeing, but if I will say that I'm just designing for aesthetics, then this is art. This is not design. Design has had this, or have the ability to mix between, you know, being functional and being also artistic. So you can't lean to one side and not the other. You need to mix between both. Of course, for me, I would always rather have more of aesthetic pleasing spaces than only functional spaces, because then you'll be only having these civil buildings, you know, going back to that. But for me, yes, you need to be having both to develop a design, really.
I I always tell to my husband, he's an engineer, and he's always messing with me because you architects, blah blah blah, do crazy things. It's like, no, we do functional things, but beautiful. So,
it can be
exactly.
both,
Engineers.
right? Hopefully it can be both. True.
Yes, we try to.
We're skirting that line between artistry and functionality all the time. It's a very tricky thing to balance, but I think that comes with the experience and knowledge over time.
No, but it's actually nice that we have different generations on board with projects, because then, you know, we have that mix together, right?
Exactly.
So the younger generation is more a dreamer, and they will fight more for the motion and for the design, while the more experienced will, you know, bring the practical point of view, which is, you know, in the end is actually, you know, better for the outcome, right? That we have.
No, many doors were closing for us, so we still have hope.
Yes.
We remain hopeless. So when we are talking about designs and emotions and the power of these emotions, where do you think this emotional power comes from? It comes from the space itself. It comes from the final user, the designer. Because, for example, I have an example that I think is pretty clear. For example, the memorial from the 9/11 in New York. I think this is the power of the emotion comes from the context itself, or what reminds us. But in general, what do you think?
For me, I think it's a mix of three. As me, the designer, also the client, and then the end user. Because you need to create this experience. And I have this example also, if it's good to mention. If you're creating a space and you're thinking of having it as a calm, smooth, you will always think about the end user and how he observed that space. But you will also keep in mind how along the way you as a designer, you're delivering that. So if the equation had all of us working together to produce that as a final result, then it's perfect. The emotion is kind of the experience of how we are designing, and then how the other part or the other party would observe that and would experience it. So that's how the design would be emotional in a term. You're trying to develop a certain feeling and you're always trying to translate it into design. And by doing that, you'll of course use lighting, you will use the just traditional elements that may evoke some emotions to the client. You need to know the client and the end user. And then after that, you will be having the perfect equation of design with emotion.
So it has to be a combination at the end.
Of course, yeah, that's my opinion.
I'm glad that you mentioned the lighting and certain elements, because that was also my next question. What hidden elements that maybe people don't really realize that they are in the design, but that you usually put onto your designs to make things happen?
I mean, it's maybe not that hidden. It's just a secondary, let's say, element like lighting, for example, or use colors of text or textures, right? So it's something that it's easy to introduce if you want to change the mood of the space, right? So it actually is something that, you know, a little bit connected to your previous question, that it can be sort of manipulated by the user, right? So you prepare the space for one thing with the lighting, but, you know, if the lighting setup is changed and it is more subtle or more cozy, then the space will also appear differently. And you can, sometimes it's your vision from the design, but it can be actually, you know, adapted to a different thing, right? The same thing with colors or with your decorations later on, right? Like if you only change, you can change a carpet and make a space look much more cozy, right? Or you can have a different effect. And the same way you can make a space scary, right? If you make it, you know, if you change the setup of the lights, let's say. Right? What do you think about it? Because if how about landscape, right? Because it's a different
It's
thing.
interesting you bring that up. I mean, I'm thinking we've got people don't often consider landscape architecture to necessarily have those elements present, but the one thing I think of obviously is planting, and like it's the thing that's like obviously right there in your face. Everyone can see it, but there's a subtlety to, you know, people don't realize how powerful and evoke, you know, emotionally captivating planting can be to your experience of that space. And like the one thing we do, which, you know, I wish we did more often, was looking at planting as a way to, in terms of seasonality. Okay. So we often design our landscapes to, we really understand when the plant flowers, when it becomes greener, And we use that as a tool to facilitate different qualities of space within our design. So like wintertime, it looks different to summertime. And we're doing that deliberately to create some kind of emotional response. It's not necessarily obvious, but it's the thing that's right in your face. And I really like that. I quite like the subtlety of it. It's like a little secret.
It's actually beautiful because it's like 4 designs in one. I mean, if you have 4 seasons, obviously in Dubai, you know,
but
you can have 4 seasons, of course.
I was thinking like about back home. Okay, it's like
4 seasons. But here you can think about it in a different way. Like the landscape designs that stick to my mind are the one where the local plants are used. So they're used in a very nice way where you see the space connected to the area. So that's why I think you can just think about it related more to the space and the, you know, the area itself.
definitely
Context, yeah.
Yeah, the context matters.
definitely.